Hello, my name is Natalie Flora. I'm a principal and workplace strategist for interior environments. From the beginning of our story in 1999, Interior Environments has lived at the intersection of the unexpected. Hardworking, running with imagination, big dreams displayed through small details, playful concepts with high-tech edges, human curiosity paired with innovative thinking. At our core, Interior Environments is all about creating spaces that reflect the fascinating people that use them while enhancing their experience. We really listen, seeing our work as a bridge builder between your vision and the farthest reaches of our creative imagination. Our company was established over 20 years ago. When I started working at the company, there were about 8 people. We now have 125 employees, 5 locations across the nation, and are quickly growing in revenue every year. I've spent the last 15 years studying the workplace and how it's ever evolving. Our company has been creating these spaces, and when the pandemic hit, we were very interested to see what that would do to our industry. The first part of this presentation, I'm going to tell you guys about what our goals were when this happened. As a workplace strategist, studying how people work and what the current trends are, the first thing that we did is put a small group of people into action to start studying everything that was going on. Our goal of this presentation is, as you think about the re-entry into the workplace, we're trying to think about how our leaders can respond and share best practices. We also want to share the most important topics, research data and insights from top performing companies, and I'll share some examples of what some of those companies are doing. We want to help confirm your clients' decisions and leave them feeling confident about the choices they are making. We want to provide inspirational concepts to implement not only short-term, but long-term as well. We want to share real-life applications of space studies, and we want to continue to be a valued partner and resource to you. Prior to the pandemic, workplace drivers are something that we talked about with our customers as they were starting to explore leasing or purchasing a new building or building a new building. And the first question we would always start off is, what are you trying to accomplish with this space? These are popular topics that always came up during those conversations. Our customers were looking to have a cool place to work. They wanted to bring innovation into their space, have it be very highly technology friendly. They wanted to potentially design a place based on activity planning, meaning their employees could really work anywhere in their building, and we wanted to design spaces that supported the behaviors of that work. They wanted engaging, collaborative offices. From a real estate perspective, we were maximizing the square footage. We were pretty much trying to fit the most people possible in the smallest square foot possible. We wanted to add amenities and perks to those spaces, whether they be gym facilities, whether it's coffee. There's a lot of different cool ways that you can make your space and your place to work cool. There was a need for casual interaction, a conversation between whether we would have assigned seating or unassigned seating. Employees were seeking flexibility, striving to have work-life balance. I think that one thing everyone has realized once this pandemic happened is how important our family and social lives are. We were planning an open floor plans with minimal offices, but potentially offices for leaders and executives. So one of the things our company has done is worked with a leading sociologist who believes that social norms in our society are the unwritten rules that won't allow you to change something. And what's very interesting about what's happened in our world is that we have a lot of new social norms, things that weren't necessarily previously accepted that are now accepted. So for example, as we go through these ideas, you think about dependent care and how much of a struggle that was for working parents during standard hours. And now we have new perspectives of balancing personal and professional responsibilities. Working from home was a choice that employees had depending on the company that they worked for. On average, most companies, you would work from home 1 to 2 days a week, unless you were potentially an employee who worked from home permanently. But it wasn't necessarily something that was widely done throughout the globe, really. Now we've seen that there's benefits and productivity and that it works. Work was pretty much 100% focused between 8 to 5 when you were in the office. Not to say that people weren't working at night and working later or earlier than that. However, the main work hours were between 8 and 5. Now we have flexible hours that are helping us create personal balance, especially with our children all at home over the entire summer, and now trying to balance that with the new school schedules. We had shared spaces that were meant to bring people together, and now we're trying to figure out how to be in the office and social distance, but still need to be around each other. Business travel was a huge part of many companies to have face-to-face meetings. Video conferencing was something that a lot of people did, but it's now universally accepted, and you don't necessarily have to be in person for meetings. Taking a sick day was seen as not committed. This is something that our society was kind of bred into the U.S. Society, where people felt that they had to work, and if you didn't come to work when you were sick, you were somewhat weak. Now we're asking our staff and employees and coworkers to please stay home when they're sick to protect others. And if you aren't necessarily really sick, you can work from home easily, or that maybe wasn't something that we could do in the past. Masks were seen as protecting yourself, and it seemed a little bit odd to see someone wearing them. We all realized that at the beginning of this, and now it's almost odd to see someone in public, well, not almost, it is odd to see someone in public not wearing a mask. Shaking hands and hugging when meeting was a form of greeting. Now we're obviously trying to maintain some distance and create no contact. We have shared resources, tools, and spaces in the office. Now we're trying to potentially protect our personal space. We were very private about our personal health. Now we are potentially getting health screened as we walked into an office or a public space. And businesses existed to make money and serve as a shareholder. And now businesses are balancing the health and the economy of their businesses and employees by prioritizing the safety and well-being of their staff. So with all of those social norms, and probably many more that have changed, we started to look at what workplace drivers were going to change in the future. The biggest thing that we saw changing are the items that are highlighted in blue. So a lot of the items in gray are potentially still going to stay the same, but now we're looking at integrating our work life and home life together. A lot of us are not back in the office yet. We're looking at undensifying the workplace and trying to spread space out versus maximizing every single square foot and trying to get the most people in the space as possible. We're trying to social distance in an open office environment, add separation and boundaries into that open floor plan, create micro offices potentially instead of large executive offices. And most of us are looking at a work from home schedule 2 to 3 days a week. Right now, a lot of people are still 5 days a week. The future and a lot of the surveys and data that we've been studying show that most people want to work permanently 2 to 3 days a week from home. So with those drivers in mind, all of those things that have changed, we are looking at returning to work. So the first thing we wanted to make sure we were doing is managing our risk. So we're looking to the government, the White House, the governor of each state, Michigan having different rules than some of the other states, looking at the CDC and OSHA for their guidelines. This was something that was so different. The pandemic, there was really no guidebook. So as we were waiting for the White House, CDC, OSHA, and our governments to tell us what to do, what we thought would be even better is to look at the largest companies in Michigan, the big three. What are they doing? How are they managing their staff and employees? Large companies like Masco and DTE, Quicken Loans, universities, Cooper Standard and Plant Moran. How are these different business units and different types of companies, automotive suppliers, companies that like Plant Moran have a large free address policy. Quicken Loans, who's one of the largest companies in downtown, occupying multiple buildings. Masco, a company that is global. DTE, who has over 6,000 employees in their Detroit headquarters. We went to these companies and interviewed them and asked them what their return to work strategies looked like, how they were managing risk, what practices they were implementing, to understand what to share with our customers and how to plan our own reentry ourselves. So the first step of that, we realized very quickly, is that most companies had two strategies. The first was a short-term strategy. How are they going to prepare? This really started as soon as the pandemic hit in March, and companies were looking at our governor to see when we would go back to work. A lot of companies were thinking at the beginning of this that they would be back. I remember interviewing Carhartt, and they had told me in March that, or I think it was May, that they were not thinking about going back to work until September. And at that time, that seemed really far away. It seemed interesting that they were planning such a long term, work from home strategy. So many companies, as that time evolved and the pandemic grew and got worse, the timing of those short-term reentries grew. And now we're looking at 12 to 18 months to 24 months before people would actually be back in their office. Most companies right now that we're talking to are thinking about January of 2021. So in the short term, they started to think about who needs to go back into the office and why. Could we go back in a phased approach? So phase one being the term essential that people are saying. Who has physical things in the office? Maybe it's we're so heavily automotive manufacturing here. Do they need to actually physically be in the building because of equipment that they're using? How do they prioritize their employees' health? How do they consider safety? What are the policy changes that we need to make? How do we communicate these changes? And making sure that we were handling this in the right way and being able to maintain our staff and make them feel safe. As we started to look at the long-term reentry, which is maybe further beyond 2021, we're looking at what we learned from the pandemic, what policies worked, what maybe didn't work, what behaviors are going to stick, what are things that are going to be here in 5 or 10 years that we didn't even realize came from the pandemic but did. Again, how are we balancing the health and the economy of our businesses and employees, establishing a future vision, reimagining our workplace, making it a place that people want to go back to while enhancing our culture and brand, and managing the change of this. So why do we want to go back? If we are all remote work capable and having an office is a cultural choice rather than a necessity, we needed to decide going forward how important our office was to our culture. So throughout surveys and research and conversations, we started asking people, and it seemed like a daily routine was something. I remember the first time I had to go back into the office, which was in May. So we were home for 3 months, and I hadn't, gotten up at my normal time, gotten ready and drove to the office. And it felt really good to be able to do that. And I was actually surprised at how nice and normal that had felt. It was a way to get away from my children, my 2 and my 4-year-old, and our kids, have some social interaction in the office. A lot of our staff wanted to accomplish some work that they couldn't do from home, whether that was due to technology or resources that they had in the office that they didn't have at home. There was a need to support clients. Being a design-based company, we had a lot of resources, finished materials, things that we needed to discuss, that we needed to have in-face meetings with our clients as we were designing and building these spaces with our influencers and design firms. And then we also maybe just needed an alternate place to work. Being at home could be somewhat distracting. People might not have had the best setups. Being lucky enough to work for a company that sells office furniture, our entire staff was able to get really nice ergonomic work from home setups with monitor arms and a nice task chair and a desk. I was lucky enough to be able to put a home office together where I could shut the door. And many people didn't have the luxury to do that and were working at their kitchen table or had all these crazy setups that you have probably seen. So having that setup was really important and maybe a reason why people wanted to go back to the office. So Gensler, one of the largest architectural firms, did a great study, and it's on their website. You can download it and look through all the data yourselves as well. But one of the things that was really interesting about their study is that the top 4 reasons that people wanted to go back to the office is to be with colleagues, to have meetings, to socialize, to have impromptu face-to-face interaction, and be part of a community, which really is telling about how social we are as human beings and what we need to be successful. We also wanted to access technology, again, focus work, have meetings with clients, some of the things that we had mentioned before in our own surveys. So all of this data was telling us that 74% of people miss the office, and they miss people the most. They miss collaborating with others because it's harder to do at home as we've all gotten into our different technology platforms. We use Teams in our office. It was amazing how well we could collaborate, but it was still certain things just needed to be done face-to-face. And then 51% of people say that it's hard to understand what other people are working on from home. And that's something that we've noticed within our own company, is it's harder to have a handle on what people are and are not doing, and hold people accountable from a management perspective at times. So if only 12% of US workers wanted to work from home full-time, we wanted to make sure that the workplace was a place that people wanted to return to, but with critical changes. So the first thing we decided to do is take action and set an example of how it can work. So in our office, we have, I had mentioned at the beginning of this, 125 people in 5 different locations. Our headquarters is in Novi, and we work out of a 10,000 square foot space. We had 60, on average, 60 employees working out of there daily, and up to 20 guests per day for client meetings or showroom tours or meetings to design their spaces. So on average, we had maybe 60 to 80 people in a 10,000 square foot space. We knew that wasn't going to work for the long haul. So we updated our showroom and shared a way that we could safely bring people back, which we'll share some examples on. Our leadership team and sales team decided to build a network and engage with other thought leaders who strongly believed in our initiative to return to work. We wanted to have a voice and build advocacy around it and make sure that returning to work mattered to people. And we wanted to be a leader. So one of the things that one of the design leaders we were interviewing mentioned to us is that people really don't know what to do. There's no playbook. There's research that we can share There's best practices with other top performing companies that we can share, but everyone was really just waiting for somebody else to do something. So we thought that creating an initiative to safely and productively return to work would make sense. And not only for ourselves in the timing that we were doing, I had mentioned that we were able to return back to work in May. However, some companies aren't returning until, like I said, January of 2021, or potentially Google had mentioned that they're not returning until July of 2021, so a year from now. As we started to plan these strategies, we realized that change management was going to be very important. We know that change is happening and that our staff needs to understand why this is happening, what the vision is, and how we're going to move forward. We needed to communicate this change, establish a vision, be consistent, and communicate often, even as the changes are made. It's been a crazy time, and our timelines and our future plans are constantly shifting. As I mentioned before, people were thinking, as we were watching the governor's orders, we were thinking, okay, we'll return in May. Okay, no, we're going to return in March, or over the summer. And that quickly changed and moved into the fall and now early next year. We needed to build trust with our employees and create a sense of belonging, connection. We needed our staff to feel confident that we were prioritizing their health and safety. It's really their ultimate decision to return to the office. We wanted to be flexible, making sure that everything was adapting and changing so quickly. We knew that we could be resilient, but we wanted to make sure we were communicating our policies. We wanted to get feedback. Surveying our employees was important. So one of the things that we did is we surveyed all of our staff at the beginning of the pandemic, asking them questions about what their fears were, what they were nervous about, what they needed to happen in the office to feel safe to come back. And then we just did a post-occupancy survey now that we've been in the office for since May. We've undensified our space and we have density protocols, occupancy protocols in our space. So I mentioned we had up to 80 employees in our office. Based on our survey feedback, we decided, and an occupancy tool that I'll share with you shortly, we realized that we would safely be able to house up to 30 people in our space, maintain 6-foot distancing, and allow people to come back to the office. So what we did, gauging off of their levels of fear and what they were worried about, we decided to have one team in per day, up to 30 people. So each of our teams are about 15 to 20 people. So you had an assigned day that you could be in the office. And then if you wanted to come in outside of your assigned day, or if you wanted to have a customer meeting in the office outside of your assigned day, you could sign up in an open slot. We used a technology platform to do those sign-up sheets. And we've been maxing out those 30 people every single day since we started this, which also made us realize that people do definitely want to be back into the office. So as we looked at reimagining the workplace, renovating our showroom, we realized that the workplace is now seen as a culture zone where employees are seeking mentorship and fine-tuning their skills. It was a space where I mentioned space utilization and technology data was going to drive occupancy and space planning. There's a really cool tool that we're going to be installing into our space that actually counts how many people walk in and out of any of the doors of our building, which was a way to help manage the correct amount of people. So in our office, it's somewhat simple to maintain 30 people. However, when that maxes out and the only person that's managing it is the person at the front desk, it's hard to count whether we have exactly 30 people or 25 people in a space at one time. So this tool, especially for really large companies, is a great way to know if people can come in or out of your building. We wanted dynamic agile spaces that provided a variety of user choice like we did prior, but we wanted it now in a little bit more of a controlled environment. Everyone wants pretty much virtual everything. It's something, one of those social norms we see as being changed for the good. We are going to continue to have virtual meetings in the office and use this as a tool for learning and training as well. We knew we would want face-to-face interaction to build relationships with colleagues, have an open planning. Nobody really wanted to go backwards, and I'll share with you in some examples of ways that we've thought of new, fresh ways to provide separation and boundaries and social distancing cues without going backwards or putting up caution tape and things like that. We now have a much higher priority on outdoor spaces, especially for real estate clients looking for new space. I think outdoor space is going to be something that's a huge priority for people. It was always seen as a space where people would maybe go outside for lunch, take a walk, eat their lunch outside. However, now people want to meet outdoors. They want to work outdoors when the weather is permitting. Open up windows and doors to let fresh air into the building. Our staff is going to be wanting flexible hours, thinking about that work-life integration, how we're managing our time with our spouses, dependents, how we're managing our school schedules, especially the fact that every single district has a different policy. It's much harder to manage these things where before everyone kind of had a similar schedule. Wellness programs are going to be very important, not only for our employees, but for our guests as well. And we wanted a space where it was an inspiration hub, a place where people want to go, where they want to come back to recharge and reconnect. From a real estate perspective, this is something that we were using prior to the pandemic, and we're currently doing some research now to think about what these square footage per person will look like in the future. Knowing that FF&E and AV is the second largest cost that people put into their space, we started to break this down and think about one of the first questions we get from the real estate community is, how many square feet per person do you suggest? And one of the first questions I always ask as a designer and workplace strategist is, what type of space are they trying to build? Do they want it to be hierarchical, where they have really large executive offices? Maybe they have director offices as well. Large workstations, maybe something more like an 8x8. They want to have a lot of different meeting space. Collaboration ratio is something we always talk about. For example, if you have 100 employees, you would have 300 meeting spaces. So that could include your cafe, it could include conference rooms, it could include, all the different open collaboration spaces, but you would have a lot of meeting space. Maybe a large corporate cafe with food service, and then a fitness center in your building. Moving to a more moderate perspective, maybe you still have larger private executive offices, director offices. Maybe the workstations here shrink a little bit, so they're more of an average size, 6x8, 7x7, a 2-to-1 collaboration ratio, so a lot of meeting space as well. On average, we're seeing 2-to-1 be what most companies are doing, and then a corporate cafe. Moving to a more progressive layout, as we move to these more agile and progressive layouts, we're shrinking the square feet per person. They might still have private offices. Maybe now we're in a benching style application or a 6x6 workstation. We still have a decent amount of collaboration, but we have a mixed use cafe. And this is a space that is maybe an all-day cafe, a space where you don't have food service, you're not supplying necessarily food or a market, but you have a space more like a Panera or a Starbucks where people can hang out and work and meet. And then the more agile square footage, these have very minimal offices, that progressive workstation, a 2-to-1 collaboration ratio, and again, that mixed use cafe, and that can go anywhere between 175 and lower square feet per person. So as we looked at defining the space for our staff, we looked at how can you create a 6-foot social distance in an office? What does that look like? How the first question that the first two questions our existing customers were coming to us asking is if we believe that screening was necessary, so adding different types of screening to their space. Now I'll touch on that later in the presentation. But then it was, how do I maintain social distancing? What's the correct occupancy that I need for my space? So we looked at how we could show this graphically on a floor plan. So this is one of our customer spaces. And prior to the pandemic, there would be a person in every single one of these seats. And what we did is looked at, this was actually a co-working space where people could come and go as they please. So there was really not a specific occupancy in mind. It was maxing it out, getting as many people to be in the space as possible. But re-looking back at it, to have a controlled occupancy, we added a 6-foot bubble into all of these spaces to show that we knew 26 employees could safely be in this space. And then from a collaboration perspective, we knew that 49 of those spaces could be filled. One of the things that's interesting to look at is the larger conferencing spaces, where we used to have 10 to 15 people in those spaces, and now they can only support groups of 5 or less. So we started using this tool to show our customers how many people can truly be in these spaces. So now we're going to move into physical applications. So how can we relook at spaces that we saw before, which are, you see a standard reception desk on the left and reimagined on the right. We wanted to show a way where you can add screening, but not necessarily make it uninviting. We wanted to give visual cues on the floor to show visitors how they could maintain 6-foot distance and know that they were truly 6 feet away from someone, and then make a station for PPE or a sign-in area where it doesn't necessarily have to be physically on the desk, so they don't have to get close to the person at the front desk. A lot of anxiety rides around that person. They're the main person in the office who's greeting customers and external people from your office, which adds a little more risk. Those same entry and lobby spaces beyond the reception desk looked like the top picture before. There may have been a large area for people to meet, hang out, wait for someone to come up and greet them, whereas in the lower picture, what we've done is we've added some modular wall to separate that space, have a high top meeting area on the left. Maybe this is an area where if you have customers or guests coming into your building, you don't necessarily need to bring them into your whole space. You can meet with them right at the front desk. Moving into the open office floor plan, one of the big things were high traffic areas. So corridors where maybe people were typically used to get around the building, didn't feel comfortable having those high traffic areas right next to desks where people would be working. So rather than adding screening and making really tall panels on those workstations, we added a modular wall system down the aisleway with markerboard glass. So it serves as a place where people could stand and meet, and it also gave a barrier between the high traffic area and the workstations. In the same area of traffic patterns, if we didn't want to add that modular wall, another nice way to do that is with planters or some type of physical boundary, showing people where the clear traffic pattern is so they weren't weaving in and out of the area where the workstations are. And then the last way that we thought to do that is with some directional signage. So maybe this is something that you could put on the floor, or on the wall, to show some companies are thinking about that traffic flow of their building and how to not cross paths with other people while getting up and moving around the space. So this is a way, if you wanted to do some directional signage, to tastefully do so in your space. Solo private office space may not be as necessary as it once was. As leaders themselves are continuing to work from home, maybe 2 to 3 days a week, they may not need this large dedicated private office with a lot of storage. I think one of the things we all realized was how quickly we were able to get rid of some of our stuff. So with the office on the left having a lot of storage, across the desk meeting style, or you were pretty close throughout that interaction, to something on the right where maybe this is an office where you're signing it out for the day. Maybe it's not yours 100% of the time. If you do need to go into the office and need a closed door space or need a space to meet with one other person, we've taken the chair, made it adjacent to the desk so it's 6 feet away, so you could comfortably still meet in a private office. Looking at solo spaces now and individual workstations, on the left is a typical workstation, 7x7 style workstation, a lot of storage, a lot of personal space, to something on the right, a little bit more reimagined. This pinwheel configuration is nice because it gets people off of the aisleway, so they're not directly adjacent to an aisle. It also allowed us to minimize the storage, added in some gallery panels and glass for separation. Those hard surfaces are a lot easier to clean, and we'll touch on cleaning protocols here shortly. I had mentioned earlier in the presentation that nobody really wanted to go backwards. As we were interviewing the design community, they wanted flexible solutions that could change to meet the needs of our customers today but transform into the future. So we didn't want to start going to the left side where we had 70 or 80-inch high panels, overheads, a lot of storage, really siloed type spaces. The need for collaboration and communication is still important, and that visual sightline, but maybe feeling a little bit more closed off at the beginning of this might be something that makes people feel more comfortable. So we've accomplished this on the right by using screens that wrap around the desk, adding height adjustability and glass down the middle, and then again those gallery panels on the ends for some separation but easy cleanability. On the left is a typical workstation, 50-inch high panels, something we've seen a ton of, teaming style application. And on the right is something that we've reimagined. So we've added, this is instead of a panel system, we've used a flexible system that can be stacked on or taken off. These components can all be reconfigured into different situations. So we have some flexibility in this where we have separation now, but in the future we may not want those end panels or that glass down the center. On the left is a benching style application, which we've seen in many different applications. We wanted a place for employees to be able to touch down. These are not necessarily workstations that have a lot of storage. These are in agile environments where the employees may be popping in a workstation for a few hours, but then also moving throughout the building to all of these other types of spaces, whether that's collaboration spaces or meeting spaces, cafe spaces. So we didn't necessarily want the workstations to get bigger, but we didn't feel comfortable with them sitting so close together or adjacent to each other. So we've reimagined this benching typical on the right to be in a pinwheel style configuration, adding some screening for some separation and boundary, but still allowing it to be a collaborative type environment. One of the hardest things I think most customers were facing is on the upper right is the conference room. So it can't hold 6 people or 8 people currently with being able to social distance. So a lot of customers were closing their conference rooms or removing seating or putting occupancy signs on the door to tell that only 2 people could be in that space. So rather than having so much square footage dedicated to only 2 people, we've reimagined it with these micro offices. On the right-hand side, you can see 4 different spaces. So where these were maybe called phone rooms in the past, now we're looking at this idea of a micro office where employees can jump on these and have them, for the day versus just for a quick phone call like we maybe did in the past. They have a space where they can take virtual meetings and calls, and it's the same size as a standard workstation. Maybe it's a 6 by 6. Maybe it's a little larger, like the one on the left. The same idea with these 2 large conference rooms. We felt the need to keep one of them in one of our client spaces, but thought rather than having 2 large spaces dedicated for only a couple people, let's take the one on the bottom and reconfiguring it into 3 spaces. So you've got 2 micro offices on the right, and then you've got a huddle space on the left, which you can see from the geometry of the furniture. We've separated those spaces out, signifying that we only want 3 people in that space. Again, on the left, that large conference room, one of the things that has been hard to solve as we've started to close or remove these large meeting spaces is that there is a need still to have a large meeting space. So on the right, we've taken the wall out and we've replaced it with that modular system where we can add some separation from the high traffic areas, but we can still get some ventilation into the space. And then we've layered the product in here with standing height furniture, seated height furniture, and some lounge furniture, so you can easily fit 3 people in the main table, 2 to 3 in the back, and maybe 1 or 2 at the standing height table. So now you've got a space adaptable for up to 8 people. Open collaboration has been something that our clients love the idea of. It's impromptu, it's casual, it's a place where people can go to meet. On the left, it was a space where 6 people could comfortably fit in a space, right on the whiteboards, use technology. But on the right, the reimagined space shows whiteboards on that separation from the wall in the high traffic area. We've used a planter to also separate some of that space, and we've added a layered standing height table. So now we're promoting that open collaboration, but in a 2 to 3 person style setting. Same thing with this space here, open standing height table on the left. On the right, we've just added a modular wall system with a slat wall. It's got still visible, you can see through it, but it gives a little bit of psychological comfort to the people meeting in that space, that they're not right next to those workstations. One of the things that we have been very careful to talk about is these separation and boundaries aren't necessarily stopping the spread of the virus, but they are making people feel more comfortable in spaces. Also giving some visual signals. This is a space designed prior to the pandemic where you'd have large meetings, whether it was a big design huddle or group huddle or team meeting, flexible space where product could be moved around, up to 20 people could meet in. And we don't want to promote that many people meeting in a space currently. So we've taken some division, divided the space in half, added a standing height meeting table on the left, and then separating out the furniture on the right. So again, that geometry of the furniture promoting the behavior of where people should sit to meet. Work cafes were something that people also didn't want to close. One of our really large customers said, we can't close our cafe. People rely on that food and they rely on that being an amenity in a space for people. So on the right, we've just removed some of the furniture. We've separated out some of the tables. We've added planters to show where the true walkways would be so that we could still maintain that amenity space that was so highly loved and used before. This is an example of a larger cafe of one of our customers where up to 100 people would meet in this space, eat in this space, work in this space, and now we've transformed it so that it still looks like a very inviting space. It was a large square footage footprint of their building that they didn't want to lose. But we just removed some of the product and the seating and spread it out a little bit and showed that up to 10 people, or I'm sorry, not 10 people, 40 people could be in this space. So moving on to cleaning protocols. So decluttering work surface has been a very big topic. Prior to the pandemic, people had a lot of personal belongings in their space. It was very hard to clean. Facilities groups didn't necessarily have a budget to clean these spaces the way that they necessarily should have been cleaned. They maybe weren't getting cleaned potentially even weekly, if not daily. It was definitely not a topic. And even if the buildings were being cleaned, they weren't necessarily cleaning surfaces. So being able to declutter our work surfaces, one of our biggest customers went to a free adjust agile environment at the beginning of the year, and we were nervous when the pandemic hit about what they would feel about this 100% agile space where everyone was sharing different areas. And they shared with us the idea wasn't to share space, the idea was to do work where you needed to do work. If you needed to do it at home, if you needed a desk, if you needed a meeting space, you could be agile enough to move around the environment. So what we did is we created a protocol, and you clean it before you use it, just like you would at a gym or the grocery store, and then you clean it after you leave. So there's an extra layering of cleaning. However, amping up the nightly cleaning of surfaces has been something that's really important. Our cleaning company actually leaves a card on the desk to show that we've cleaned the space. Another form of cleaning, which is not necessarily new, it's something that's been being used in healthcare for many years, but it's newer to the office environment, is electrostatic cleaning. So this is a way that you can clean every inch every square inch and surface of a space. So germs get and bacteria spread at hard to reach surfaces. So electrostatic cleaning utilizes a charged molecule to disinfect solutions that repel each other. So getting into those hard to reach places like underneath a work surface, on storage handles, on seating, monitors, all these areas that people touch, the arms of a chair, this could be something that you do quarterly. It also could be a way to mitigate risk. So if there has been an exposure in your building, you could potentially electrostatic clean a part of your building wherever that potential exposure risk had happened. Increasing the idea of sanitation stations throughout the building is important as well. So adding, as we talked about, cleaning the space before you use it, and after you leave, making sure that those cleaning supplies are nearby and easily accessible is very important. Making them look a little bit nicer was a priority for us in the design community. So we've designed some PPE and sanitation stations within these boxes that you see it below, and then we've also added in some nicer looking sanitation stations to put throughout the building. Signage has become important, giving our visitors a cue as to what they need to do when they get into our buildings, taking care of high traffic areas, showing the occupancy of how many people should occupy a conference room or meeting space, reminding people to sit every other seat, or rather than removing all of the seating, giving some directional signage and just instructions and protocols throughout the building. So giving a nicer, fresher look to maybe some of the signage we've seen is, and maybe these are temporary signage pieces as well, or vinyl applications. So in closing,